Feel comfortable?
All right. As well, so the question is Asian civilization a good idea? My first reaction to this question was that it was a strange thing to ask. More to the point might be, is civilization a good idea? But to qualify that, either Western or Asian civilization is either good or bad simply by their presence resonates with both hypocrisy and prejudice. However, that does not answer the question. So, is Asian civilization a good idea? My initial reaction is to say that it is. The study of any culture or civilization is a good thing. At least in theory, this is true. It could also be argued that an examination of a culture can be detrimental if it is not done with unbiased perspective. A fundamentalist Christian examining gay culture in order to find fault to further an anti-gay agenda could hardly be considered good. But it is possible that the process of the examination could open the mind of the examiner in ways that they had not anticipated. This does not imply that the examiner would have an open mind to at least some. This does imply that the examiner would have an open mind to at least some extent. This is not always the case. In the past, many Western portrayals of Asian civilization have been similarly biased. Even the way that Asian history is presented, or more often not presented, to school children in the United States shows either ignorance of the subject or a bias against the material, perhaps both. In reading the book, When Asia Was the World, I was struck by the omission from my education of just how completely interwoven and integrated the various cultures and civilizations of Asia were. This was illustrated by an economy that was already thriving and prosperous long before the Europeans emerged on the world stage, and that in fact the influx of a European presence actually had a detrimental effect on the previously existing established economy. The history of Asia, as I was taught it, was comprised of not much other than isolated cultures with little more than tribal advances. Gordon's book clearly and irrefutably portrays that this concept is as false and misleading as it is dangerously narrow-minded and bigoted. It would be nice to say that Asian civilization is not a necessary term or concept, but the West is not quite ready to merge its own history and civilization with that of Asia in order to create a true concept of world history. We liked it.
What do you think about your essay now that you reread it aloud?
Well, I like it.
Uh-huh.
I've read it aloud before because that's one of the processes I do when I'm editing. So,
do you always do that when you write something? You just read aloud?
Usually, I would say probably 90% of the time before I turn something in, I've read it aloud.
It really helps for me too. You know.
Yeah, it does.
I do it constantly.
Yeah.
In fact, I have to print it out. You know, I can't just look it on the screen because I often just go overlook mistakes time and time again. Yeah. Fifth time, I'm still finding stuff.
Yeah, particularly because you know what you want to say, and if you don't go back, read over it again, or even like in the case of reading it out loud, is when you realize, oh, I missed a word, or something doesn't quite work. And I guess as I'm reading it, there were a couple of moments where it was like, maybe my word choice could have been a little better there. But So.
What are the processes that you go through in terms of writing? Do you draft something, outline, or?
No. I actually, usually when I'm writing, I keep in mind my initial thoughts for whatever the point of the paper is, if that be a question that like an instructor gives or something like that, or if I'm writing a review of a movie or a book or something, what my basic point is, not really a thesis, just, the general thrust of what I'm trying to say, and then just work from there. And I usually try and just kind of introduce the idea to myself first, and then start hitting the points that I want to make, and then I go back and flesh out each section from there. So,
do you ever ask other people to look at your paper?
All the time.
Really?
I have two people who have been very gracious to and kind to look over my stuff. So I email it, send them a copy through email, and they look over it and point out, things that they think don't quite work or something. So
fantastic, because my mentor, Peter Linebaugh, whose poster is behind that little book, 2 books. Those are written by by Peter, and he does that with me, which is really, really I find it very humbling, because he sends his work. He's been doing history for many, many decades, one of the leading historians in his own field of the world, and when you get a chance to read his stuff, it's like reading, what is it, the original screenplay by George Lucas or something, and being asked to
yeah, he's not that good of a writer, but I
comment,
get your point,
something like, or Joseph Campbell,
right? Yeah,
you name it. So it seems to me that for him it helps because it he gets kind of feedback that is unpredictable, unexpected.
Yeah.
If he were to just read on his own,
Yeah.
Regardless of the level of knowledge.
Well, that's high praise that he would send you stuff too. If you have
Yeah.
you know
I feel very honored to
Yeah,
to get
that's
it.
wonderful.
After 10 years, he still has not considered me completely a fuck up.
Excellent.
But you never know. Maybe tomorrow. But,
No, I doubt that.
But what writers had the biggest impact on you? I mean, you mentioned like Doc Savage and science fiction.
Yeah, as a kid, as a young kid, like 8 or so, I was primarily interested in comic books. So I have to. I mean, when you're talking about people that influenced me, the first person I have to mention is Jack Kirby, who was a phenomenal creator of comic books from the I think he actually started in the late 1920s, maybe it might have been the 1930s. I can't remember exactly when he started, but through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, into the 90s. I mean, he was just a powerhouse of, just churning out huge amounts of stuff. And by sheer volume, looking at his work, it's staggering to think that one person could have produced this much stuff of this, not necessarily maybe the best caliber, but a consistent caliber, and that was just amazing. So he created with Joe Simon, he created Captain America, which is a character that's endured, very iconic. With Stan Lee at Marvel, he created the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, the X-Men, the Avengers, Iron Man. He didn't actually work on Spider-Man per se, but he was the first choice to do Spider-Man, so he actually created the costume, of which then Steve Ditko took the costume, and he and Stan Lee went from there. So very instrumental in creating most of the Marvel characters from that era and stuff. So.
What did you find Kirby's work so attractive? I know as a kid, you of course his adventures and all that, but
yeah, initially it was the adventures. I guess part of what I really enjoyed was because the first comic book that I really liked and realized, hey, this guy who was drawing this or writing this and stuff, which at that time it was Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, was the Fantastic Four. And from that, what I really liked was the sense of family as well as the sense of adventure. And it wasn't like just a superhero comic book. They weren't, always running around fighting villains. They were exploring new worlds and, discovering new life forms. And, so it was more of a science fiction kind of thing in that. And that's what Kirby brought to that book. That was one of their ideas that they wanted to do. And it was actually an evolution of an idea which he had at a previous company called the Challengers of the Unknown, which were 4 people who had died or escaped death in like a plane crash. I forget exactly what it was, but they didn't die, and so they were, they felt like, they were living on borrowed time, so they went off and had all these crazy adventures. And then at Marvel, they rehashed the idea, reworked it, and created the Fantastic Four and developed it from that. So.
What did you think about the film adaptation?
It was okay.
It's always a disappointment, isn't it?
Yeah, and I knew it would be. I knew they couldn't really capture all of it, and they changed the emphasis away from the family. Not as much as they probably I was expecting them to, but they, it wasn't quite. It just wasn't. It didn't have the same magic that particularly the old stuff did. So there was Jack Kirby, and then you mentioned Doc Savage, and about the time I was 10, I discovered a series of books that were just paperbacks on the shelf, and it was like, I think the first one I bought was volume number 63, and I'm like, here's a series of books, and there's 63. Wow, this is like a comic book. So I figured, okay, it was Doc Savage. It had a cool cover and stuff, and it was called The Submarine Mystery. And so I picked it up and read through it and was like, this is absolutely amazing. And one of the first things that caught my attention was that this was sometime in the 70s. What first caught my attention was that it was set in the 30s, 1930s. So here's someone who's got all this high-tech, well, more or less high-tech stuff back in the 30s. Not quite computers, but but he's got cars that are, much faster and much more durable than what they were back then, and rapid-fire pistols, and used mercy bullets because he didn't feel like killing was appropriate. So any villains that they were fighting, he was always knocking them out. And